Good morning, and as Chairman of the Exmoor Society, welcome to this second webinar in a series of 4 that we're running over the 4 Fridays and running on the theme of Nocturnal Exmoor, the Darkness Revealed. The last webinar held last Friday can now be seen on our website. You can see and hear the full 1.5 hours, or just pick it into parts of it. And similarly, at the end of this one next week will similarly be on our website, where you can watch it if you particularly want to go into detail on some of the speakers. Today, we concentrate particularly on night and day and bring in fact, our 3 speakers who will be dealing both with wildlife and of people and the effect of night on them. Our 3 speakers will be introduced by Nigel Hester, who has actually masterminded the whole of the programme and is one of our trustees. Please can you use your Q&A button to ask questions as each speaker takes place, because they will all come together at the end and form a panel to answer your questions. But first, to put us all in the mood, we're going to look at a short film and an explanation of how it was made by Jem McCluskey of Reflex Eye. Jem.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Jem McCluskey, and my career was actually as an engineer and a scientist, although I've always had an abiding love of photography and film, and nowadays that's what I do. I'm also a commercial drone pilot and must say an environmental activist, and still provide consultancy in such things as hydrogen technology. The film you'll see hasn't quite gone according to plan, to be honest, but due to the unpredictable weather on the moor, but it does highlight, no pun intended, one of the issues of 20th and 21st century life: light pollution, glare, sky glow, clutter, light trespass, etc., which have a multitude of effects on the environment, which I can comment on in the Q&A if anybody wishes, perhaps. You'll see light pollution actually over South Wales in the film, actually. I hope you enjoy it. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Jem. Let's see, my picture doesn't seem to be coming up. Can everybody see me all right? seem to be visible. Anyway, good morning everyone, and a warm welcome to this, our second of our 4 webinars based on Nocturnal Exmoor. Last week, those who joined us will know we concentrated on wildlife, and in particular how light can impact on the behaviour and breeding success of many nocturnal species, from invertebrates to mammals. Today, as Rachel said, the webinar is entitled Night and Day, not a reference to Cole Porter, I can assure you, but a reflection on how the rhythms of light and darkness affect the natural world and indeed the lives of people, especially those of us who are lucky enough to live within Exmoor's Dark Sky Reserve. I'm really thrilled this morning to introduce our keynote speaker. Tim Dee is a BBC radio producer, broadcaster and acclaimed writer of many nature-based books, including The Running Sky, 4 Fields, Landfill, and my favourite, Greenery, Journeys in Springtime. In 2018, Tim was elected as a Fellow at the Royal Society of Literature. Tim has lived and worked in Bristol and Cambridge over many years. He has family links with Minehead, and I'm pleased to say that Horner Wood is one of his favourite birding spots. Tim is joining us this morning, not from Exmoor, but from right down at the southern tip of South Africa. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you to the Society for inviting me to talk. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a lovely autumn day where I am, just a couple of houses short of the Cape of Good Hope. And I've said goodbye earlier this month to the last barn swallows that have been wintering amongst me. They've all gone on north now, and what I'm going to talk today about is some of those birds that have come to Exmoor in the last few weeks, including barn swallows, our familiar swallows in Britain, and particularly some of their journeys and how they've got to Exmoor. I'd like you to imagine a crucial trinity, a holy trinity for me of the best species of birds in the world, which Exmoor is famous for, has some of the best resources and reserves for. 3 species, all of which are migrants, all of which have spent their winters in Africa, who've arrived into the oak woods, particularly of the Exmoor fringes, the Coombs, Horner Water, Eastwater, those woods around inland from Porlock and Minehead. Also into the Quantocks, it has to be said. Exmoor's not got sole rights to these birds, but 3 species of bird, magical birds: the Wood Warbler, the Pied flycatcher, and the Redstart. Now, please think, if you can, of about 3 or 4 weeks ago, mid-April, something like that, a dark night in Exmoor. There's probably been many dark nights in Exmoor in mid-April. Imagine, as I've done before, a walk around the woods at Horner Water on a mid-April day. The oak trees, some years already fleecing up in their lovely lamb's tails of catkins coming into leaf, but mostly still bare. And in that wood on that day, that mid-April day, just the first of my 3 birds has arrived. It's a redstart, a male redstart. Immaculate bird. I could spend the rest of this 20 minutes describing what it looks like. I trust you know them, and maybe, I hope many of you will have seen them. And it's singing from the top of an oak tree. It wasn't there the day before, and it's arrived overnight. It's a night migrant, and it's arrived into where it's going to breed in the night, and it sings from the very first morning that it arrives. The other 2 species coming slightly later in the month, pied flycatchers. Again, the male will arrive before the females, and they'll immediately adopt either the territory it had last year, which is an extraordinary thing to think about, which I'll come back to, or a new space that it's found because it's never been in the wood before, although most likely it will have been in the wood before, most likely it will have been hatched in the wood before. And the 3rd species, a couple of weeks later, in the beginning of May, I hope they're there by now. I know they've been seen on the coast around southwest England, Wood Warblers, an exquisite bird, a pied flycatcher, a black and white bird. The Redstart is a multicoloured, almost tropical coloured bird. The Wood Warbler is a beautiful northern green, a kind of cold green above, and a silvery white underside, and it has a fabulously metallic silvery song that it sings from those oak trees. All 3 species can be seen in the same tree. All 3 species have arrived in Exmoor, in Horner Woods, overnight, one night, say in early May, and they're there then for the rest of the breeding season. So let's think a little bit about how those birds got there and how they travelled. Remember, these are tiny little things. They weigh no more than 10 grams. They've got a brain the size of a pea. They And yet within that brain, they have to have a function that's allowed them to both get to Africa, south of the Sahara, and turn around at a certain point and return north to Exmoor or wherever else they're breeding across Western Europe. All three species are quite widespread. In Britain, we're at the western limits of their range. Elsewhere into Eastern Europe and Russia, those birds are much more abundant than they are in Britain. Anyway, they've all been in, let's stick with our birds in Horner Wood. They were there, they hatched the year before. The adult birds of all those three species were left their young behind in those woods and would have headed south. The young, amazingly, know already to head south themselves. They first of all leave in a roughly southerly direction, southeasterly or southwesterly direction, and they leave Europe. They know they've got to get out of Europe in one of those 2 points of the compass. But no one really knows how they do it or how they know that. What they don't know, though, is where the hell they're going. So they have an incredible drive to leave. These first birds that have never seen the night sky before they're hatched, never seen Horner Woods before they've hatched, and yet they know to leave. And they head south in a semi-random way. They find a place, and if they survive, they flourish in the winter time. All of them, all those three species, again, as I said, heading south over the Sahara. The Sahara itself is an extraordinary thing to contemplate, crossing 12 million square kilometers, the size of the USA, 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers in width, north to south. An extraordinary inhospitable terrain. I've been to the desert, in fact, explicitly looking for redstarts. My redstarts, as I like to think of them, that I'd seen at Horner Woods the year before, and saw redstarts in the southern side of the desert in Chad, waiting to commit themselves to their onward migration. Amazingly, a lot of those birds fly across the desert in a single journey. They weigh about 10 grams, as I say. They've got a brain the size of a pea. They know it's better to fly by night, so they fly because it's cooler. There's fewer predators around. The wind turbulence is reduced at night. The dehydration and fat loss is much reduced. So it's worth their while, although they can't therefore sleep. But amazingly, they're also adapted not to sleep at night in their migration times. The fat they put on in their staging places before they commit themselves to their northward journeys alters their sleep patterns, as well as building up their body reserves. They fly north and they cross the desert. It probably takes them about 72 hours of night flying. Some of them fly through the day as well. Often in the day they drop down and might crouch motionless underneath the rock in order to keep out of the sun. They don't actually lose too much water apparently in that condition. Then as soon as sunset goes and color vision fades, they're up into the sky. They can't see any better than us at night. The human's vision and those small migrant bird vision is about the same. What they can do though is read the star maps, and quite possibly also, no one knows for sure about all these species, detect or taste, as it were, the magnetism of the Earth's field. So they have a number of tools that a night traveler like me or you wouldn't have when crossing the desert. And amazing to think these tiny birds have got what is effectively a map, a compass, a clock, and a calendar within them that guides them over the sand, and then of course over the Mediterranean, which is no mean feat for a small bird to cross as well. Some birds indeed cross the Sahara and the Mediterranean without stopping. Pied flycatchers in the autumn flying south from Horner Wood stage almost entirely. They fly from Somerset, Devon to western Iberia, and they fatten up in northern Spain, western Portugal, and then fly in a single journey from there south across the rest of Spain and Portugal, across the Mediterranean, and all the way across the Sahara. So winter then in the Sahel regions and slightly further north in West Africa, in wet forest. Redstarts, my favourite birds of all those three, go slightly further east, right down the middle of the Sahara, and they go slightly further into the Sahel, this sort of semi-arid, semi-desert area that runs as a broad band across south of the Sahara. And there they spend their winters. And amazingly, again, just as I said, those birds coming to Warner Woods are loyal to the tree that they might have hatched in as their tree for breeding in the following year. In the wintertime as well, having established a wintering place, the birds will come back, if they survive it, to the very same wintering place the next year. So once they've made the journey once, they know where to go. So that's my story, really. They fly across the desert alone. Night migrants normally fly at about 2.5, 3,000 feet, where headwinds and tailwinds are more in their favor. Some birds have recently been recorded flying much higher than that. It's amazing how little we've known and still know about how they managed to do it. Amazing to think for a moment also about how theories. I thought I might read a list of conflicting theories, which will just give us an idea of how scientists have struggled. This was made nearly 100 years ago, but in many ways there's been not many substantial advances. This is a little quotation then from my book, Greenery, which loves those three birds and loves Warner Woods especially. But this is just to give you some inkling of the kind of our human bafflement, the extraordinary amazement that we felt in the contemplation of migration. So someone said there are definite routes of migration. Somebody else, there are no definite routes of migration. Someone else, birds learn how to migrate. Someone else, birds migrate by instinct. Orientation is traditional. Orientation is congenital. There is no leadership. There is leadership. The weather has no essential influence. The weather has an essential influence. Temperature plays an important part. Temperature is not an incentive. Flight occurs at 3,000 feet. Flight occurs at 35,000 feet. The original home of birds is the tropics. The original home is not the tropics. We still don't know the answer to the last question. What's a very fascinating instance is that there is a single population of barn swallows, which is a worldwide species. There are North American barn swallows that winter in South America. There are East Asian barn swallows that winter in Southeast Asia and Australasia. Barn swallow is a global species and it's migratory in all of its range except for one little population in the Nile Valley. And there's some speculation that this bird that doesn't migrate there, doesn't need to migrate, might be the origin of all the barn swallows in the world. Migration is an adaptive, evolutionarily adaptive behavior. Birds do it in order to exploit the situation that they find in front of them. And we have to think also that Exmoor and the migrants to Exmoor are relatively new on the scene for them. Of course, the last glaciation in Britain that finished about 10,000 years ago, at that point, there was no summer migrants came to Britain. It was possibly too cold for them. They were hiding out in refugia in Southeast Europe and in Iberia. So in that last relatively short time, in biological terms, in the last 10,000 years, all these birds have learned to move north gradually and then to return south. Extraordinary to contemplate that, this learning, this discovering that there were places to go, such as this beautiful temperate rainforests of the western combes of England and Wales and up the west coast of Scotland too, that could give them a better living than they would have had had they stayed in where they were. Those barn swallows in the Nile never needed to leave the Nile because it remained green and fly rich throughout the year for them. So that's probably about as much from me as you need. I mean, I love also the thought of other bird watchers looking at these birds and figuring out how they go. Interesting that itself, not all birds fly at night, not all birds are night migrants. And there's some curiosities here. No one really knows why some birds should be night migrants and arrive in Exmoor in the night or in the following morning. And other birds might be day migrants. You might have seen pipits and wagtails flying around in the daytime. I've seen them many times, meadow pipits bravely leaving Minehead. I mean, I know a lot of people feel the need to bravely leave Minehead and heading north across the Severn towards equally uninviting to my mind, the hills of South Wales. Meadow pipits, wagtails do that. Other birds are night migrants. All of the warblers, thrushes, you might have heard on an Exmoor night, a beautiful wintry or autumn night, that seep of redwings flying overhead, that the sense of a net of birds quietly communicating with one another, seeping as they fly over the sky, over your head. They're thrushes and redwings, night migrants. They're birds that actually come into Britain from further north from Scandinavia to spend their winters with us. So yes, flycatchers, chats, thrushes and warblers fly by night. Tits, finches, larks, wagtails, pipits and crows fly by day. Big birds often fly by day because they need, like storks, cranes, birds that Homer was familiar with, and the writers of the Bible were familiar with that as indicators of seasonal change and so on. They fly by day, but that's because they mostly need warm air, daytime air, thermals in order to get height and then to keep themselves going. Swallows, our lovely barn swallows, to come back to finish with the place I started with, are day flyers. They fly up to 200 kilometers a day on migration. They fly just about 5 or 6 feet above the ground. They catch flies as they go. They roost in big agglomerations overnight, and then they head up again in the daytime. So you get that wonderful sense of the sociable bird on the move when you see a flock of swallows arriving. They're almost always travel with others of their kind. Pity my poor little wood warbler or redstart or pied flycatcher. They've done it all by themselves, and amazingly they make it. Though most of them make it, although times are not so easy. The desert is generally a bastard to get across. The Mediterranean is not so easier either. It makes me often think also of the plight of human refugees. When I was watching Redstarts in Chad, I was also in the company, and not that I ever saw them, but I was told that they were there, of human refugees, human migrants desperately seeking to leave Eritrea and Ethiopia and South Sudan and move north across the desert and then across the Mediterranean, an equally perilous journey for those human migrants as it is for the birds. I think looking at migration can often make you feel that. It also makes you feel how home for birds is so different from our own feelings of home. I mean, we love to travel and journey, but we have a strong sense of our own home. And when I first saw barn swallows here in South Africa, although I knew intellectually that they came here for their winters, I looked at them and thought they were away from home, because my home is Bristol, the West Country, and I knew them as my swallows, and I wanted them to be in my home. Although, of course, in December they're much better off in Cape Town, where I'm the ones watching them. So that's the sort of baggage we carry with us. Gilbert White, who loved swallows above all birds, and was a very acute and extraordinary observer in 1700 Hampshire, couldn't quite bear to think that his swallows went south. He had a brother who lived in Gibraltar who saw swallows moving south across the Straits of Gibraltar into North Africa, but he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge that his darling swallows actually went all that way. He clung to this belief, which was widely held at the time, that they might have hibernated, because he'd seen swallows flying low over the water in the dusk time, and assumed just as night turned, they actually dipped under the water. He had ponds drained and thatched roofs cut open, hoping to find sleeping, hibernating swallows. He didn't do that, but and in fact, had he gone to Horner Woods or even onto Dunkery on an April morning, you might have seen swallows dipping in, coming down, touching down, descending towards Exmoor. Just as the Redstarts and Pied flycatchers and Wood Warblers had, having crossed in the night, the swallows coming in the day. So hold on to that. Go to Horner Woods now. Those birds, those amazing survivors. Not one of those birds that you might see today hasn't crossed the Sahara twice. Astounding to think of that. And when they first did it, they were only about 6 weeks or so out of the nest. Equally astounding. Night migration is one of the wonders of the world. But seeing the birds in the daytime, as you can at Horner, is equally as good. Thanks very much.
Tim, that was absolutely marvellous. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed that. Learned so much, and I hope everybody else has enjoyed it. Very appropriate now, because we're going over to our next speaker, Holly Purdey, who, with her husband Mark and their 2 children, Fergus and Moss, they run Horner Farm, funny enough, just outside the Wood, which is a National Trust farm in the Porlock Vale. Holly has an exciting, refreshing approach to farming based on rebuilding soils, wildlife, and a sustainable farm business. Holly, over to you.
Just share my screen. Wonderful. So what I wanted to do was take you on a little bit of a journey for how we as farmers sort of go through the night. So more of a story really about how, sorry, I'm not sure what's going on. Here we go. Because it's a really unique role as a farmer, and at certain times of the year, sort of, we see night and day. It's quite an unrelenting task really as a farmer. So sometimes night and day, and I just sort of wanted to present about how as farmers we cope with that and our animals' behaviour throughout the night. So I wanted to talk about this sort of undisturbed world. Sorry if I can get this to behave. Okay, we're back in business. So as we enter night on the farm, I feel like a weight's often lifted. So gone are the tasks of the day, but we make way for darkness and peace to ascend. It's often a feeling of taking a deep breath after a physical day. Although life never stops on the farm, and invariably we enter the night to care for our animals, there's always this sense of calm at the end of the day. And sometimes the bringing of night causes worries for us as farmers, for those young left unprotected by their mothers. But I often feel this is a matter of trust in our animals and trust they will defend their young. And also trusting that when we have an undisturbed ecosystem, that healthy lambs will be left undisturbed as alternative food sources are in abundance. And I think that's something that we can sometimes miss. We can miss these links in our ecosystems. But then there's also this other side where there's this sort of darker human nature within it. And it's also a time of worry from fellow humans. Now, there's significant theft on farms, and night often leaves things exposed. And I think as humans, we often feel exposed. We don't, sort of our senses are heightened. And I recently, because we've been lambing and calving, I headed out to the shed late at night, sort of about 2 a.m, I think. No, it was earlier than that, 11 p.m. And as I was heading out, some torches were shining through our orchard where our young ewes and lambs were. And they were starting to bleating and they were calling. So quite unusual behaviour from the animals. I could see these torches and voices. And actually my heart started beating and I started to worry about what was sort of happening. And sort of tried to silently call my husband from the bedroom window. But then I heard the squeal of brakes, and it was just in fact a nighttime group of mountain bikers out enjoying the evening. But I think there's definitely sort of a sense of forbearing sometimes and worry around the night. So I sort of wanted to start with as the night draws in. So when the evening bird song is heard and the sun sinks below the clouds, our animals' behaviour often shifts. So the final lambs that have been frolicking with their mothers return back to be close, and the calves, they gather into a creche setting. So they're often sort of with one mother or a few mothers surrounding them. And we also observe that different groups of our cows sort of gather together in almost friendship groups. So in our case, our breed of Dexters and our Shorthorns sleep separately. So they graze together very happily throughout the day, but at night they sort of turn into two very distinct herds. And as a farmer, we often carry out late final checks of the day. And this is this incredible time where we're wowed by bats hunting over our heads, badgers trundling along their path, or the call of a tawny owl. And it exposes this whole host of wildlife that is often unseen by those tucked up inside. And it gives us a unique view into the world around us. I recently saw our resident barn owl during this time as I went to gather the goats from an old barn, and it silently passed over our heads, something I wouldn't have known was there if I hadn't been out at the time. And then I really wanted to sort of touch on animal natural behaviours. So I've just come through lambing and calving, where the majority of animals gave birth at night this year. And I must admit, I didn't overly enjoy that as a farmer, as a human. It's really tiring and it adds layers of complexity if there's issues, particularly with the cows. But actually the behaviour of our animals is really strategically planned by them. And They enter labour in the cover of darkness and then welcome in a new day with a newborn, allowing the newborn to gather strength throughout the day. And actually, this is shown when they're left undisturbed. This is what our animals are most likely to do. And when I speak of disturbance, actually, this can be something as simple as us as farmers feeding our animals can change their natural rhythms. So there's actually papers being written on how you can feed animals to minimize nighttime birthing. But actually, for me, I feel that now I've observed my cows, which have been left outside undisturbed by a human routine, and they've been allowed to calve to their own rhythm. We've seen this adjustment in their time of birth, and the same with the sheep. And though, yeah, tricky for us as a farmer, but kind of wonderful that we're allowing them to exhibit this behaviour. And often at night, you'll hear calls in the night from animals, and this is actually a key way for them to communicate in the darkness. So, you know, as a farmer, we'll hear the bark of the vixen or the bleating of the ewe to call another one together. Maybe it's a warning or just to rejoin the flock or the herd. And then also grazing drops during the night, and this allows them time to rest and ruminate for the day ahead. And something that's really important to be able to see this natural behaviour is building trust with our animals. It's really important that they remain undisturbed when we check them. So I do go out and check them in the middle of the night when we're calving. So I use my voice to tell them it's me, which they recognise, they know who I am. And actually when they hear me, they stay lying down and they stay very undisturbed. And I can sit out with a head torch and watch someone carve, and just occasionally with a flash of the head torch, like this cow is here. So she's lying down, carving undisturbed, and I would just flash my head torch to see how she was progressing. And then I wanted to very briefly touch on light disturbance covered in the last week, and I learned a lot from it. But so the plants and animals depend on Earth's daily cycle of light and dark rhythm for their behaviours, such as reproduction and feeding and sleep and protection from predators. And as humans, we continue to disturb this. And I live in this tiny hamlet of fauna where you wouldn't think we would get much light disturbance. But actually, you know, light shines out from a toilet block, from our barns. You know, the red glow of my heat lamp is impacting, and there's this pink glow on the horizon from the local town. And it, you know, it has a significant impact on our wildlife, yet we are a dark sky reserve. So I often wonder how significant it would be in other areas of the world. And my husband often jokes at me because he'll find me in the shed with a head torch on. I don't like to use the large barn lights. It causes a lot of disturbance to those in the shed. And we bring our sheep in for lambing at night. And I often find this slows down their natural lambing process if I'm in there disturbing them. So we try to leave them undisturbed, and I check them by camera or the sweep of the head torch, ideally. And then sort of in the darkest hours, I call this sort of between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. It just feels like we're giving into the night. And so when I go out at night to check my animals at this time, it feels incredibly peaceful. So the noise doesn't travel up from the road, the lights don't illuminate the landscape, and there's this sense of surrounding ourselves in the night. And when the moon is bright, and when we're walking through the night with no torchlight, it's often this immersive, peaceful experience as a farmer. Because when you initially rise from bed, like when your alarm goes off, you feel really groggy-eyed and stiff-limbed. And knowing you need to move to check your animals, it can feel like this really hard act to climb out of your bed. But as you step into the night air, which often sort of brings this great chill to you, it kind of fills you with fresh air and actually heightens your senses. So it's this cold air almost feels like it awakens us as humans. And then as morning breaks, so as the darkness gives way into daylight, the dawn chorus signifies to the world its reawakening to the daylight, sort of hustle and bustle, I call it. It's often my favourite time of day when a new day dawns and the whole day ahead of you've got the whole day ahead of you, but it's still really peaceful and you still are seeing the world. You almost feel like you're alone in it. And this is also really when we get grass growth, which is obviously really important on a farm, and because it's taken all its energy needs during the previous day and it processes during the night to then grow at dawn. So I think we all often feel this experience when we wake up, the world seems brighter, but actually that could just be from the fresh growth of our plants. And then I wanted to talk about the impact on us as humans and being a farmer. So I took this, I got this picture taken because this was in the middle of lambing when I'd had a couple of nights where I had hardly slept. And for me, it just shows how tired I am. And I'm actually hiding behind a piece of wood so I can watch a sheep that didn't want me to see her lambing. And she would stop every time I saw her. So I'm hiding one side of the barn to view over. But it really captured my tired eyes, I think. And just, we push our bodies through exhaustion and mental turmoils as farmers. And sometimes that can really take its toll. We need sleep to rest as humans and recuperate. But when we're faced with our role as farmers, we don't put ourselves first. We put our animals at the very front of everything we're doing. And this can really take its toll on sort of our physical and our mental health. And it's a real struggle sometimes to work on limited hours sleep. And that sort of links in with our farm safety. And this is something that is really important for me, particularly as a farmer with 2 young children, is that during this time when we're working on a few hours sleep, we can make mistakes. And that's something I think as a farming community, we need to maybe learn to ask for help more. So when we reach something I've worked on, when I reach my point of absolute exhaustion and I think I can barely operate, I turn to my family or I turn to a friend and ask them to come and help me on the farm to do some physical jobs, or maybe allow myself to catch up on a few hours sleep. Because I think we need to give ourselves time as humans and remember that we're not designed to be awake for 24 hours. And we're not being the best farmer if we are that tired. But also, I wanted to just touch on the sort of mindfulness that when you're awake at night, alone in your shed, it also allows a time for reflection when you're not disturbed by, social media, or you're not disturbed by the goings on. You've got nobody to talk to, and it allows us sometimes to reflect and sort of plan in a really peaceful way. And I just wanted to touch on relaxation, the positive side of night times for farmers. So we can actually, when we're not lambing and calving, farmers offer, sort of nighttime offers us a chance to rest and recuperate after long days. We often can't meet up with friends in the day, but at nighttime we can see our friends and our family without that pressing need of jobs to be completed in the daylight hours. And it can be a really isolating job. So sort of these trips off farm in the evenings can be really essential ways of speaking to others and sharing ideas. The Exmoor Hill Farming Network often offers talks during the evening at times when we can actually all get together. And this is really essential for sharing ideas and pushing farming methods and just actually taking time for us. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that sort of journey or story of life as a farmer at night, and the impacts on us. So yeah, thank you very much.
Holly, thank you. That was absolutely splendid. Really nice contrast with Tim's talk before. Really, really good. And yeah, make us all think about the job that farmers have to do. A really difficult job, and well done. Our last speaker today, I'm delighted to introduce Rob Wilson North, who is Exmoor National Park Authority's Head of Conservation and Access, and who has a passionate, expert in-depth knowledge of historic landscapes of Exmoor. And I'm sure many of you will know him, and looking forward to his talk. Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll just make the technology do what it's meant to do, hopefully. I hope you can hear me and see the screen. And thank you to Nigel Stone for this opening slide. I was interested in Rachel's introduction, The Darkness Revealed, that I'm not sure whether I'm going to be revealing much, perhaps more of a sort of a gloom of uncertainty in terms of the past. And as LP Hartley said, the past is a foreign country. So you had perspectives this morning on Exmoor at night, and I'm going to give you a series of those, I think, adding to the narrative so far. The last time I saw Hope Bourne, and one of the few times I actually met her, she presented quite a serious aspect of the moor at night, and I paraphrased what she said to me, but it was very colourful and sticks in my mind, which is, you haven't spent a night on the moor. If you haven't spent a night on the moor alone, then you don't know Exmoor. It is only then that you may believe what some have written and said about the place. And I sort of nodded earnestly and thought, yes, those are wise words. And I wanted to give you some perspectives on how we see it and how we think of the place at night, and then perhaps how in the past it's been different to that. So the wonderful Ursula Halliday in her book Glenthorne describes a view that we don't see, and that's been very eloquently put across to you by Jem, who opened this morning. So Ursula is sitting in Glenthorne writing her wonderful sort of biography of the place, if you like. And she describes looking out at night from Glenthorne. On both sides of the house, the trees slide down the hills to reddish cliffs. And on clear nights, the Nash light, that's the Nash Point Lighthouse, shines on the walls, and the moon shines over the sea through the branches of an old pine tree. And I think that's an incredibly beautiful piece of writing, but it's also incredibly sad because, of course, if you look across to the Welsh coast now, you don't see that at all. You just see this glare, this monstrous glare along the skyline. So that prick of light, if you like, that Ursula noticed and was able to see night after night has gone, effectively. It's been lost in amongst all the other lights on the Welsh side. So there you are. That's not that long ago, and it's already something from the past that we will not experience. But I can't talk to you without bringing the Knight family into it. And there's a wonderful, and I'm staying with Glenthorne as well in a neat way, I hope. And in the words of Helen Glenthorne Cosway, who had to take her name as part of, or rather her father had to take the name Glenthorne as part of a marriage settlement, written down her recollections written down in 1937 of Frederick Knight. That was the son of John Knight. So she starts by referring to John Knight. Old Mr. Knight was a friend of the Reverend Walter Stevenson Halliday. His son Frederick, who you see in a rather wonderful portrait, which is in the National Portrait Gallery. It's one of the first photographs, actually, in probably about 1860. So it's probably the earliest, well, the beginning of photography in this country. He's an Italian photographer, and it's certainly the first photograph we have of Frederick Knight, taken in about 1860, as I say. His son, Sir Frederick Knight, used to come over to Glenthorne and dine, then ride back across the moor to Simmonsbath after 2 or 3 bottles of port. I presume, therefore, he was riding back from Glenthorne to Simmonsbath in the dark. So you rather hope his horse knew where it was going. And I just reflected on how you would actually do that. So for your benefit, that's a distance of the very minimum 11 kilometres or 7 miles. It's an ascent of nearly 2,000 feet. But it's also a descent of nearly 1,000 feet. It's no mean feat. And Sir Frederick, it's no mean feat to drink that amount of port, really, but with that inside you, to not even raise an eyebrow at going back from Glenthorne to Simmonsbath, and how people weren't fazed by being out on the moor at night in the past. And I think that's a really interesting perspective to have and to hold in our minds. And it
Rob, we seem to have lost you. Yeah. Oh, what a great pity.
Could Anne ring him and possibly start so that he could re-enter again?
Possible, Rachel. Well, in the meantime, while we're waiting for him to come back, maybe we could take a couple of questions, so we're not wasting time, as it were. I've had a few in, actually. One for you, Tim, if you're there. From John Wibley, he said, "Our swallows are back, an absolute wonder of our creator. I'm surprised to learn of their low altitude flight, which seems risky, while certain butterflies migrate at 500 meters, I understand." So perhaps you'd like to comment on that one. I think you're muted, Tim.
Yeah, hello, forgive me. Yeah, it's interesting. Swallows do, they do sometimes fly at night, especially when they're crossing the Sahara. Apparently, they lift up but by flying at low altitude, they're able to feed as they fly, and they're pretty good at doing that, as we all know, and it seems to work for them. They're fast flyers. As I said, I think they do up to 200 kilometers a day, whereas most of my special three little birds are only doing about 40 kilometers a day. I mean, 40 kilometers an hour, rather than 200 kilometers in a day. Well, that's quite the same anyway, isn't it? Anyway, never mind, forget scrub that. But it's true that they are day flyers, day migrants. One of the interesting things about nocturnal migration versus diurnal migration is that the birds that go the furthest distances tend to be night migrants. And swallows, of course, which fly some of the furthest distances of all, are bucking the trend. They're day flies. So that's a conundrum. It might indicate the relative youthfulness of the swallow as a migratory bird in evolutionary time. As I said, back to that Nile, that population of the birds in the Nile that doesn't move because it's happy where it is.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Holly, there's also one for you from John. He says, "Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, and great to hear appreciation of the Exmoor Hill Farm Network." He says that we used to catch and move leghorn hens at night because of their flightiness, but it's all too easy not to rest in compensation for night work. I'm sure you recognise that too.
Yeah, I think it's very easy, isn't it, to just keep going. Or like sort of find, yeah, I think there's tasks that definitely would be easier at night. And I think it's tricky to find balance and to find rest as well, particularly as a role of a farmer, because you do sometimes just have to make hard decisions to leave it for the next day, actually, to look after ourselves.
Thank you. Important one, I think. Tim, can I ask you one? Obviously, there's a lot of talk, well, not talk, reality of climate change. How do you think that's going to affect these long distance migrations of birds?
Well, it's already having a toll, I think. I mean, I think the pied flycatchers of Horner, the British population of pied flycatchers is down quite substantially, and the reason for that seems to be this. I'm sure others will know about this concept of phenological mismatch, where the caterpillar bloom in the oak woods is occurring earlier than it used to happen, and the pied flycatchers haven't yet got back from West Africa at the point when the maximum caterpillar count is coming across the oak trees. Interestingly, the wood warblers, who winter in a similar area south of the Sahara, Burkina Faso, Ghana, have been able to adapt and are coming back slightly earlier than they used to. The pied flycatchers are coming back slightly earlier than they used to, but not much, not early enough for the pied flycatchers. Wood warblers also missing out on their caterpillar bloom, but they've been able to exploit other foods. So the wood warbler, the breeding success of the wood warbler remains high on Exmoor and elsewhere in Britain. However, the British population of the wood warblers halved since the 1990s. Is falling even faster than the pied flycatcher. And the explanation for that seems to be maybe not climate change, although it could have it's certainly an anthropogenic cause. It's to do with the quality of the woodland that they were dependent upon wintering in south of the Sahara in West Africa. Agricultural intensification, wood forest clearance means that there's far fewer places for them to do their Exmoor life in their winter time. So they're taking a hammering on their wintering grounds. Pied flycatcher is taking a hammering on its breeding grounds. Both of them have climate change drivers behind them. Of course, it might be possible that I don't know. These temperate rainforests have been much in discussion recently. Whether they're going to be able to move north or move into other landscapes as the climate changes across Europe and elsewhere. Already as it is, Redstarts and Pied flycatcher goes very far north in Scandinavia, so so there's probably not much further north for them to go. Wood warblers might be able to move further north. It would mean that we would lose them. We'll lose them at Horner Woods, but then at the same time we'd probably be losing the Oak Woods as well. You on this, Nigel, as I'm sure, and others will too. But it's grim. So that's why I think we must get out there as soon as we can and see them, love them once we can, and do everything we can to not make it go wrong for them.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think somebody at the moment is doing an inventory of temperate rainforests in the UK, and I think it's important. We know where they are, but also, as you say, whether they can expand. Too many of them are sort of tight within a fence or whatever, and we have to think a bit differently about how they can expand, I think, if we're going to save them. Any other questions?
Can I just add one thing on Rob's inspired by Rob? Can I add something that Rob was touching on about night walking? I just was remembering that Coleridge, not on Exmoor but on the Quantocks, was a famous resident of this neck of the woods, that neck of the woods, Rhodes Kubla Khan in Porlock, knew Horner Woods and the trees between Porlock and the Quantocks. Also wonderfully credited with the first recorded record of a nightingale in Somerset, his poem written in the Lyrical Ballads, describing a walk he took in May 1780 something in the Quantocks and hearing a nightingale. Dorothy Wordsworth recorded it. She was also on the walk with William as well, and she recorded it it said it was in April. Coleridge put it into May, or the other way around. I can't remember. Anyway, it's the first publication of a nightingale record in Somerset, and I think has been listed as that. So it's good to hear that a night walk in Exmoor area, Exmoor Quantock area, has delivered this fantastic poetical record of a nightingale, but also the first acclaimed scientific record of a nightingale.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Another question's come in from Catherine Nichols. She says, with the increasing suburban nature of Exmoor, open sheds and barns are being netted or closed off to keep the, quote, filthy swallows out. What, if anything, can be done by the planners? I don't know if anyone would like to try and answer that one.
It's a good question for Holly, I would think. I mean, it's awful to see. I know fellow workers who are really depressed by over clean farms.
Yeah, Holly.
Yeah, obviously this isn't something that I would support. I think it's really tricky because there's actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to combine it with a question that's just come through on the chat, talking about it links about the decline in biodiversity. So I think we actually just need to shift and change our attitudes. We really need to remember we are part of nature and not separate from it, and we should allow space for everything. So, if we're having to net our barns because we're worried about birds poo on the items in the barns, maybe we could change something as humans rather than remove the habitat available for the swallows, I suppose, is my way of looking at it. And that sort of links with the biodiversity question, in that actually, I just think the single biggest change we could make is change the way we think and imagine and see ourselves as part of it, not separate from nature, and everything should be integrated going forwards. That's obviously something we're doing personally. And I think there is a shift towards this, but actually those changes need to be made quickly, if I'm honest, and yeah, without hesitation.
I quite agree with that, Holly. Spot on with your answer, I think. I mean, I find it very disturbing to see how much netting's going on, particularly in urban areas. There's been quite a lot on social media recently about birds returning to try and nest in buildings and getting caught in netting and dying. It's horrendous. We need to change our own behaviour, and I quite agree with you that we are part of nature. Sometimes we see ourselves outside nature, and that's wrong to me. Apparently, Rob's back online. I've just seen a message. So can we try and get back to Rob? If that's at all possible.
Yeah, I apologise. I'm not quite sure what happened. I'm not quite sure when I dropped out. So
it was just after the port you dropped out.
Oh my God! So do you want me to carry on at that point, or what would you like me to do?
If you can go back to that.
Right. Am I sharing?
It looks like we might have lost Rob again, sadly. How are we doing for time? It's just coming up to 12 o'clock. So, Rachel, would you like to say a few words? We can leave it for a few minutes.
Nigel, I just wondered whether there were any questions. Did we cover the questions that the speakers said that they often got asked?
I've covered the ones from Tim. I didn't have others, actually.
Didn't have any from. Could I just ask Holly, have you done a lot of work on explaining to groups, and particularly farming groups, on your approach to farming?
I do a little bit, but to be honest, we've been so sort of within our own bubble, so to speak, since we've taken on the farm. That's not something I've done currently much of. We have some farming groups visit, but you know, more in reference to sort of specific management tools we're using, such as silver pasture. But yes, something that probably, hopefully in time, we'll have a little bit more. But I hope that I am working on collecting evidence. So I believe in evidence-based will aid sort of future change within farming industries. And actually, until we've got that evidence base to back up what I'm claiming, it will take a little bit of time. So, you know, that's including things like measuring our soil organic matter. We have butterfly transects, bird transects, bird sort of monitoring going on the farm, and hopefully continued monitoring in other areas. But that's going to take time to show that our farming sort of model will fit, and also is economically viable as well as a business, and that's really key. And so obviously as a new business, we're quite open, so I'm really happy to share sort of the finances behind it, because in theory this sort of lower input system, you make the same profit per acre, so it should be it should appeal to a wide proportion, and you're still very much farming, and you don't lose that role as a farmer, but you're just making space and you're working to enhance your farmland.
Thank you for that, Holly, because it kind of rather sums up what I was really going to pick out of all the things I said today, was this factor of getting over to people that we are not separate from nature. And from many of the examples that we've been given, it shows how very similar we are, and that we need to have a greater, much understanding of nature. The wildlife trusts and many other bodies are doing great things about this. But what we really need also is for so many in the farming community, and especially the younger people coming through, to be able to develop this message and to be able to show evidence of the things. And Tim, can I thank you enormously for all the explanation of the birds coming. I cannot believe you're sitting there in South Africa, and yet we could hear you and get to you online, and yet we can't have somebody sitting near Dulverton able to be able to get through. We've got so much more to do, haven't we, on the whole broadband thing. But again, it was that incredible knowledge that you have of the movements of birds. And I learned so much. I mean, I picked completely the wrong birds that I thought you would be talking about. And certainly I want to get out to Horner now to be able to see the joys that you were talking about, the Redstart, the Pied flycatcher, and the Wood Warblers. So thank you. We'll suddenly find, I fear, Nigel, that Horner becomes very, very popular again.
Yeah.
I hope that by that it doesn't disturb those birds coming through. I can't thank you all enough. I'm just very, very sad that we weren't able to hear Rob, who has quite a following in Exmoor because of his ability to put things over so well. Possibly in the two later webinars that we've got coming up, we might be able to include them as well. So I only can look forward to next week's webinar. And even though all of us tested before we let all the participants in, let's hope that that runs much more smoothly, because it's actually returning to the use of the arts and how we can learn so much through the arts about wildlife and about our relationship and the fact that we're all together. We're not separate, we're all part. Thank you so much. And we look forward to you coming next week.